Good afternoon, everyone in the UK and Europe, and good morning to everyone that has joined us from overseas in the US. So, got some, I know we always talk about the weather, but we've got some snow over in the UK. I haven't, so I'm a bit disappointed. It's proper winter now. It's like every time we have a session, it's like going through the seasons, isn't it? But anyway, we've got a really interesting topic today. But before we start, I just want to introduce you to Vanessa. So Vanessa, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. My name is Vanessa Petberg. I am the head of legal for Helios. I have been around pretty much since the beginning, and I have worked with Rick for even longer than that. Actually, in 2025, it's going to be 6 years. And I have worked in international payroll for even longer than that. It's 10 years. That makes me sound a bit old, but also experienced, I guess.
Doesn't make you sound old. It just sounds like you're a seasoned professional. So I think that's really good. And just everyone knows Rick, but Rick, I just thought, just in case there's somebody new that has joined us, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So Rick Hamill, founder and CEO here at Helios. Look, I've been in global payroll and HR for quite some time. My background was initially in supporting government contracts. I worked for a government contractor out of the U.S. who had to deploy talent in Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and Japan. I saw there was a big need or a big gap within global payroll. And Melanie, this is when global payroll was Excel files uploads. So, it's definitely not what it is today. So taking from that experience from an HR and payroll perspective, and then bringing that to the market and a couple of my companies. Last one was very, very successful. And then, launching Helios, which is really focusing on the entire client journey. We realized that not all companies expand the same way. And so we want to build a platform that met our customers where they were at in their journey. So super excited to be here. The partnership with GPA is always amazing. And thanks for having us today.
No problem. So we've got a slightly different topic today. So payroll and the employee experience, how complex processes can be damaging. So I've been saying to people recently, I think like the employee experience is like the new buzzword. It's been talked about a lot, and especially around payroll. So what does it actually mean? What is the employee experience all about?
Yeah, I'll start off with that. I think what we've realized is that the world has changed. And I always hate trying to bring up COVID all the time, but that was really a turning point in how companies were managing global teams around the world. And so that experience was, we were used to having employees in the office, we're able to see them, talk to them, hug them if need be. But with COVID, it really changed. Companies started to look at, hiring talent around the world, and that was remote talent. So how are you connecting talent into the organization? How are you making sure that whatever they need, so for example, onboarding an employee and making sure that they have the right tax documents, the right enrollment documents, how do you have that readily available to them? It's going to be really important. And what we found with studies were that most employees that were remote, they somewhat felt like they were on an island. And how that really impacted them. And you start to see a lot of turnover with organizations, more so than they saw pre-COVID, because employees were not necessarily connected to the vision, the mission of the organization. And a lot of that stemmed from really their onboarding experience and how they connected to the organization. And we'll talk a little bit about payroll with that. I always bring up the statistic. After 2 pay cycles, if an employee's payroll is incorrect, they typically are looking to leave or looking for a new opportunity. And so when you're looking at organizations who are hiring talent in countries they've never hired before, but they're hiring the best talent for their organization, and they've got all of these kind of mistakes that come in because they're learning as they are onboarding these particular employees, the experience is not always great, and the employee loses confidence and that organization or their systems or the partners that they're working with. And then they say, look, I don't, one thing you can't mess with is my payroll. I'm gonna have to go somewhere else with an organization that really understands that. So that employee experience really stems from onboarding the employee and also their overall connection to the organization. And that's really been a huge impact and how technology is evolving and why we're now using that quote unquote buzzword employee experience, because employees are the ones who actually are driving how companies are leveraging technology, how companies are processing payroll to make sure they're doing things the right way.
And also the cost of rehiring, it's quite a frightening statistic, isn't it? And I did actually repeat this statistic to somebody, and they said, this is really bizarre because my son has been paid incorrectly twice, and he is now looking for another job. So it was just like, just by chance. But also the time and effort to get a new employee on board, but also the recruitment costs. It's a really expensive job, isn't it, to employ somebody nowadays?
Yeah, the cost of an employee training is really expensive, right? So that investment the organization has to put into when they're hiring new talent, think about it, 90 days, how much time and effort are you using to train them, to make sure they have the right equipment, to make sure that they have the right proper understanding of the business, and then that person leaves. Then you have to do it all over again. And so it's really important to think about that employee experience and try to figure out solutions that allow you to really understand. I use the term global all the time. Think about the term global. How do you be global, but also local so that employees feel confident in what you're doing? Because remember, we've all been in the work environment for quite some time. So we have our understanding, our standards of what we should expect when we're onboarding in a particular country. And so if I'm not asking for example, in the US, if I don't ask an employee for their I-9, if I don't ask them for their W-4, they're going to immediately think something's wrong with my payroll, and that I'm gonna have a bigger issue. And so you want to make sure you're building confidence when you're utilizing systems and building processes and procedures to ensure that they have confidence in what you're doing, so they don't have that question of doubt. And here's the fun part: even if there's a question of doubt and the payroll's correct, employees are still going to ask about it because they feel like something's wrong. And so building that experience and building that strong foundation, having the right technology is going to be really key to your overall success for that.
Oh, go on. Sorry, Vanessa.
So I heard the word global, which is a term I know from Rick. I don't know if he invented that, but I think this is a key word for international payroll, because I said myself earlier that I work in international payroll, but let's not forget one thing. There is no such thing as an international payslip. All of us have either a French payslip or a Spanish payslip or a German payslip. No one has an international payslip. So you need to build trust for people like myself, because I am, what I didn't mention earlier, I am originally from Germany. I live in Spain and I work for a US company. And I hate to bring up COVID again, but I was in the privileged situation that I worked like this internationally, globally, even before COVID. But after COVID, this has become more of a standard. And you need to trust an international company to know how to elaborate a Spanish payslip or a French payslip or a German payslip, because that does not go without saying. Absolutely not. That's why you need this global focus when you work internationally and globally.
And the translation behind that as well is really important, because I know what I'm used to. I'm used to my particular taxes. I'm used to how my pay look like. And some of the things that I've seen with companies who are, they don't have that global mentality within their platforms. Employees go, what is this? What is this US pay slip? What is this? They translate it to English so that the client can understand it, but they don't understand. The employee may not understand it. That localization, that it's going to be so important to that employee experience, because they just want to make sure that they get paid on time, and that you don't want them focusing on payroll. You want them focusing on what they do best, which is helping you build your business and grow your business and their overall jobs. And so that piece is so important to the employee experience. And I know it's the buzzword today, but we should be thinking about it. We should have been thinking about it 15, 20 years ago, because we want to make sure that, employees are not taking 10 to 15%, which is the statistic is, of the time to really understand payroll if they feel like there's something wrong.
And do you know what? You said something really, I was actually thinking it when you said it, that we should have been thinking about this 15, 20 years ago, because, it is so true, isn't it? That, we put so much effort into employees, or we should put so much effort into employees, that the systems and everything should be correct. And again, I know I'm saying COVID for the third time, it did change so much. It did highlight everything, and it has changed the way that we're working. And I don't think all of us are going to go back to full time in the office. I still think it's going to be hybrid. I still think that we're going to employ people all around the world. And especially when there's, things happening like the UK at the moment, we've had a change in our budget. Would you employ somebody in the UK, or would you look to employ somebody in a different country? So the global and the globalization isn't stopping. If anything, I think it's growing and growing. So in the title, we've talked about, complexities of processes and how it can affect the overall employee experience. Vanessa, do you have like any examples, or could you discuss that sort of in more detail about why you don't want things so complex?
So payroll is extremely complex in every single country, and is a completely different world in every single country. Even in the EU, there is no such thing as any kind of common approach when it comes to payroll. Neither is this planned, nor do I think that I will experience anything like this in what is left of my professional life. So we need to take this into consideration when we see the opportunities that the after-COVID world actually provides to both companies and employees, which is what you said before, Melanie. It is hiring globally more than ever before. It can be almost a burden, because if I look for someone and I'm not constrained to a specific country or language, the whole world is my market. But I need to be aware of the local differences and the complexity of payroll and of labor law regulations worldwide.
Do you think that with employment law, like the way that employment agreements are drafted, how that impacts payroll? Because I think sometimes the complexity of what companies are used to in their home countries, and they try to bring that into local countries where their employee or the talent resides, that creates complexity within their employment agreements. Can you talk a little bit about that, or your opinion behind how the employment agreement or the regulations actually can be impacted when you try to overcomplicate the actual agreements that you put in place with the employee?
What all companies do, and this is very much based on their country of origin, they try to adapt the employment agreements to their company policy. And to a certain degree and to a certain extent, that is possible. But you run into certain stops at some point, okay? Because you have to adapt to local law. It's not an option, it's obligatory. And even if you compare conditions that can be the actual salary, it can be benefits. It is not as easy. Let's take salary as an example, which we are back at payroll for. You cannot go into two different countries, let alone more of them, and just compare the sheer number. Never, ever. Because conditions around that differ so much that what you end up paying as an employer can be completely different in two different countries, even if the net amount that you offered the employee per year was exactly the same. It has nothing to do with each other, and Rick knows that more than anybody else. It has nothing to do with each other. And so it's not, oh, I'm excited, I can hire someone in Europe and it looks cheaper at first view than maybe in the US, for example. Well, that is really just at first view. You have to go into the details to really know what you are buying into. And you need a local partner for that.
Yeah, as we think about the complexity and how to simplify that, I think it's really important. I think sometimes having to speak with customers and having to kind of train them on, the complexities of the differences. So we hear this a lot with U.S. customers where, they're always thinking, what do you mean there's no at will? What do you mean I can't terminate an employee? I think that's important as you're going to think through the educational piece of that and how to walk through customers, what that looks like and the complexity of that. I know, for example, in our tool, we have a country comparison where a client can see a gross payroll, a net payroll, and the differences in between, so they can compare and make those decisions. But I think that it's making sure that companies have the right information readily in front of them to help make that decision, and also see where there's complexity and where there's not. The way that you onboard an employee in the UK is going to be very different than how you onboard an employee in Nigeria versus how you onboard an employee in Canada. So really understanding the complexities of that and try to simplify that as much as possible is going to be really important. Companies tend to make better decisions when they have all the information readily available to them. And then also if you make it more simplistic. And I think that sometimes we as providers, just as a whole, we sometimes overcomplicate that. I think we just need to make sure we simplify that as much as possible for customers to really understand it, because that complexity can create a lot of mistakes as well, because they're thinking or interpreting that or translating that into what they understand in their home country. And sometimes that's actually translated incorrectly to the employee. And then there's a different expectation for that employee than was actually what you're trying to implement as well.
And we have got a comment which I'll come over to in a minute. But that's a really good point that you made about hiring or firing, and the US, how different it is to other parts of the world. And I think when companies from the US are employing people in different countries, are surprised about how hard it is to terminate employment. Is there an element where the payroll and HR leaders should be almost managing the C-suite to understand, to teach almost the rest of the leaders within a business, actually, this is the situation now that we are going to other countries. You should be aware of this legislation. It's not easy just to get rid of somebody, and you can get into a lot of trouble.
Well, I think payroll and HR always has to have a seat at the table. I think that's really important. We've had this conversation before where I think that there should be a chief payroll officer, there should be a chief HR officer. And so you can really understand what that means, and they can sit at the table and have those conversations. And if there's not that room for it on an executive level, definitely need to be able to present to the executive team what's going on and help through strategy. I think that's really important. I'll caveat that by saying, look, I've been the head of HR before, and I worked for a CEO, and I said, oh my God, he has no idea what he's doing. This is not gonna work. And then being a CEO, I go, oh, I get it. I understand it. So it's really trying to understand how you can walk in each other's shoes and really understand how you can complement each other and make sure that your voices are heard and help with the overall strategy of the business. I think it's really important because the world we live in today, we are thinking about employee experience. We're thinking about turnaround and turnover with employees, but we're also thinking about how do we make sure we're being strategic? How do we make sure we can compete in the global world as well? And that's hiring the right talent, but making sure that you have the right partner or the strategy to help you do that and think through that is going to be really important for the success of your business and how you're actually implementing new technology, how you're actually onboarding new employees, and how you're actually making yourself flexible and how you're actually onboarding. And here's the thing, you may, as I mentioned earlier on the call, we talked about not every company expands the same way. So building flexible opportunities or solutions for companies is going to be really important too. Sometimes they may start with contractors, and there's some rules and regulations behind that in every country. Sometimes they may use an employer of record that gives them a lot more flexibility behind that, just in case they want to dip their toe in a particular country, and an employer of record is going to have a little bit more understanding or understand the rules and regulations to help a company navigate through that particular country. Or if they're setting themselves up already and they're already registered in that particular country, they have that flexibility of setting up and making sure they're using the right systems to do that. So there's a lot of opportunity now since post-COVID on how organizations can expand and do it compliantly. But it's really important to take a step back and really do the analysis and say, does this make sense for your business and what direction you should go? And then take the steps to make sure that you're decomplexing it as much as possible, because that complexity, when you overprocess the process, it's not good.
So thank you so much. I didn't say at the beginning that if you have any questions or comments, please add them to the comment box. But checklist plays a critical role. And to have a better employee experience, we should roll out the employee surveys. Both we migrate or change to a new system, which will give us a better understanding of voice of employee. I like that, voice of employee, before changing any systems or transformation.
That's really important. You should definitely get buy-in from the employees as well on what systems they like. We actually have a couple clients that we're bringing on right now, and we actually recommended with them that they brought employees, key employees, not managers, but key employees that can really see the demo, really understand what they're getting into, and test the product. And we've seen a lot of amazing feedback from that. Not only feedback on how they, excited about the product, but also feedback that things that we thought about that we maybe didn't think about that we're adding to our roadmap for the future as well. So that feedback, that employee voice is so important. They're the ones that are going to get in. Statistics show that employees only log in platforms typically 2 to 3 times a month. It's really if it's a PTO request or vacation request, if it's a checking their pay slip, or making updates to their personal information. Now, how do you get employees into the platform? Utilization of those platforms is going to be really important. And even a mobile app, what that looks like for the employee, getting that employee experience is going to be important, because if you're super excited about a mobile app with a provider and all employees say we don't really use the mobile app, then you're not buying. You don't need to buy that particular solution. And I think that's what we're trying to make sure is hearing that employee and having that employee at the table, or at least a representative of the employee at the table at all times.
And do you think, and maybe this is a really obvious question, but do you think with things being over complex and having a poorly managed payroll system can damage a company's reputation internally and externally?
Yeah, I think that when you, and I always suggest vetting your vendors and going through that process. I think that's really important. Um, It does, because the provider or the system that you're using is an extension of yourself. And so if you're leveraging a platform just because it was the cheapest out there, you're going to get what you pay for from that perspective. But you also are going to maybe impact how employees trust you and how you're actually implementing things within your organization. A smooth implementation, a couple test runs, those are really good practices to put in place when you're implementing these type of systems, but making sure you have the right partner that can walk you through it. Now, there's things that you can focus on that's automated and really focus from that perspective from there, but it's really important that you have training tools. I'll give an example. We have a walkthrough whiz within our platform because we understand that we're a global company. Clients are in different time zones. Clients want to learn different ways. So we put certain tools in place. If it's a video for employees, if it's a walkthrough tool that employees and clients can have. If it's an implementation manager, so that human factor as well. When you think about payroll and HR, we put those things in place because we also understand that all companies and everyone learns differently. But making sure that the client has access to that information, the employee has access to that information, really helps them gain confidence in what you're doing, what you're building. And then I think another thing is constant feedback. Sometimes companies are afraid to get feedback, and everyone's worried about that NPS score. NPS scores are just right at that moment, and it gives you an opportunity to improve. So making sure that you're partnering with companies that are constantly asking you, hey, what do you think? How are you feeling? What's your solution? But not just asking the company, quickly asking the employee. And that can be a quick question when they make a change within the platform. It can be they finish their onboarding, give it a 5-star rating, or rate us 1 through 5-star rating. Those are things that really will help companies improve. And if you see systems that don't ask those questions, I would ask yourself, what's their investment into my experience and my employees' experience and the platform as they're investing into the roadmap.
So one of a couple of things that we've said is trust and compliance. And I've never really thought about it until now. Actually, they go very well with each other, don't they? Trust and compliance. Nessa, so you've obviously worked in the international payroll field for 10 plus years, 10 years. And how would you recommend people keep on top of compliance? Like, should they 100% trust their provider, or is it something that you would suggest that they keep on top of, different compliances in the countries that they're dealing with on their, on their own?
You should be able to trust your provider, and technology is supposed to make our lives easier, not more complicated, not more complex. It should build trust that even in a global international environment, you can still have one single centralized platform for your payroll and for managing your employees. But we come back to the word local. This platform needs to guarantee your local compliance, not international compliance, because there is no such thing as international compliance. Compliance is always going to be local. That is to say, a global international payroll, HR management platform will always guarantee your local compliance at the same time. And you need to be able to trust on that, of course, yes.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, if you, because we do come across some of our members where they do get caught out with penalties that they're not expecting. So you're right, you should trust your provider, but I think people still get found or caught out by penalties that they're not expecting, that maybe that's not in their contract with the provider, and they assumed there was something in the contract to say that they would be told of certain things in country. So we do come across where people do get caught out.
So one of the questions, Melanie, you want to ask yourself is, how are companies making sure that their systems are up to date? I think that's a really important question to ask during your RFP process or your vetting process when you're looking for new platforms. That compliance piece is so critical right now, especially with global payroll expanding the way it has over the last couple of years. and making sure they have those checkpoints, right? Asking, about their type of certifications. Do they have their ISO? Do they have their SOC 2 certifications? Asking them what they have in regards to their vendor process, that they're leveraging LPPs, meaning local payroll providers within their platform. How are you vetting them? How are you checking them? What does that process look like? Asking those questions, and a good provider will give you transparency behind that, so that you can get a little bit more, be reassured behind that. And then I think as you're reading your MSA and your terms and conditions, you should see what's in there. Now, there's always a opportunity to understand what a penalty is, and sometimes countries assess based on the information that's provided. Now, a platform can only do so much. If there's garbage in, there's garbage out. And so there is responsibility for both parties, but having a party that can leverage something like an AI tool that can actually vet what's being put into the system, I think those are things that you can ask and get some insights on from that perspective. You want to make sure that you're asking the right questions and the tough questions up front. I always say you negotiate the divorce before you get married. And it's because you want to make sure that when things like that happen, who's responsible for it? Now, again, payroll is fickle. When I say fickle, it means that if you put something incorrect in there, the system's going to calculate based on what you put in there. And so making sure you're asking the right questions, making sure you have the right support behind that. If you're not sure if you can pay someone under minimum wage, you should probably can't. So you make sure that you make sure you understand what that looks like. And some systems, and like Helios has this, we have guardrails in place where a client can't do those things. So we say, look, you can customize as much as you want, but we've built a framework of compliance for you so that if you try to do something like minimum wage, the system won't let you go further if you're trying to do anything underneath that. So making sure you're asking your platform provider, like, what are you guys doing to help me understand complexity and compliance? Because I'm just not going to these particular countries, or I've been operating in here for a while. I'll give a story. I have a client that's actually out of the UK. And they were working with a provider in the US for payroll. And it was done completely incorrectly and horribly. And so we're actually working with them because they're coming on board with us in January, but we're actually helping them correct their payroll with the current provider so that the end of the year will be correct and the W-2s will be correct for employees. But we want to make sure that when they put in any information in our platform, we're actually going to do it. So it's that provider taking that extra step to decomplex. They're not in the US. They're based out of the UK. They're used to UK laws. Example, monthly payroll. They're like, oh, we do monthly payroll. Like, well, no, you can't really do that here. So we walk them through that and help them understand that, and then held their hand, even with their current provider, to ensure that they're right. They're doing things correctly through the end of the year. Help them with communications with employees, and then getting and implementing them now for January 1st and going forward within our platform. That is the type of level of service that you need, especially when you're going into countries that you're not really familiar with, or you've had issues with in different countries. And that's what we provide here at Helios. But that's what I believe in. From an HR professional and a payroll professional, I don't know everything. So I want to make sure that I have a partner that really can help me and train me, not just tell me to put data into a platform.
And payroll is a small community, or payroll and HR is a small community. And I think you're so right about the data going in, because I will say horror stories, because it's the situation that none of us would want to be in. When things go wrong is when the data is incorrect, when they've gone to a new provider, and it is literally, bad data going into a new provider, and then wondering why it's still bad coming out. That's such a key, isn't it, to get things sorted before you go onto a new provider.
Yeah, one thing that we did, we do on our platform, which I think is really powerful, the client can put information in. And so we understand that companies have a currency that they operate as a business. And then we also understand that they're paying different currencies for employees. And I saw this recently happen with a client where they transcribed the currencies incorrectly. So what they had for US dollars and what they had for euros was the opposite. And so what we were able to do was we said, look, before anything goes into payroll, there's a validation from you and from the employee. And if the employee says this is not correct, they can easily provide a note in the system, creates a task, and you can update it directly within the platform. But there's certain checkpoints that you have to make sure that things are done correctly. But look, we're all human. Humans make mistakes, right? So what you want to have is a platform that's catching those things and making sure that you're looking at things the right way. Another way that we also were able to help that particular client is that we show both the local currency and billable currency, so they can understand the complexity behind that as well. So they've got full visibility. They're not just having to do Excel files. They're not having to just do uploads that way. They're actually able to review that, verify that, and then the employee actually validates that as well before anything gets set up, so that we know that the payroll is going to be correct from day one.
And we do talk about technology, and I think I've said this so many times to you that I am a bit of a geek, and I love a gadget, and it's like the secret side to me. Any old gadget, I go out and buy it. But we're still in a world where there are people that don't have technology, or it could be some parts of the world that having a certain phone isn't possible to have access to. So what do we do about that side? Because that is still complexity, isn't it? Not everyone has the hands-on technology. So how do you help that part of the working community?
Now, Vanessa, do you want to take that one first, and I can jump in?
Sure. So as a matter of fact, from a legal point of view, this is actually debatable. I don't think that in at least not all parts of the world, you can actually force people to necessarily use certain tools. So you will have to have an alternative in place for these scenarios. And as a responsible partner, you will always set realistic expectations for your clients. But as an experienced partner, you will also know where and when you will run into this kind of issues. I would almost say that in the countries that I am most familiar with and have most work with, this has not been the case. Okay, that is all Latin America, that is all Americas, actually, North America as well. That is all Europe. So I think we are talking about places outside of that. But as a responsible partner, you will give a heads up to your client and say, hey, this and that can be an issue. Let's put an alternative in place.
I think when we think about the complexity in some of these countries, and some of them are just countries like within Africa, within Asia, and even some parts of Europe, actually, to be honest, some of those things have, people are still very in the archaic kind of way, wet signatures. They're not allowed to, sometimes taxes are walks over to a tax authority to pay. People are still using checks, surprisingly. But it also really looks, you have to think about it from a customer perspective. It's also industry. Certain industries are still used to very manual processes. And I'll give an example of that. Typically blue collar and gray collar organizations, employees tend to like checks. They don't want direct deposits. And so you have to ask, what industries are you really supporting from a technology lens? Are you used to that blue collar? Are you used to that gray collar industry? How do you support that? There are also some historical components in certain countries that create distrust for banking institutions, things like that. Excuse me. You probably heard what happened in Argentina a few years ago, what happened in Mexico about almost 15, 20 years ago. But people want to see paper checks. People want to have the cash in their hands. And so how do, these tech-focused platforms support those type of industries? And the answer may be they can or cannot. But those are questions you have to ask when you're implementing, because if you are, maybe white collar in one country, but you've got blue collar employees in another country, is this the right platform for you? And is this the right, how we're going to implement them and service that? So it's really important to kind of think about the complexity of that. But you're absolutely right. There are different nuances in every country based on industry, based on country, that you have to think about and take into account as you're building out this and trying to streamline your overall global operations.
How important is transparency and communication to your employees?
I think that's a question that we already know the answer. You have to have it.
That's the most ridiculous thing, but it is, isn't it? Some people do not. Some companies will not communicate changes to their employees. They're not necessarily transparent, and I think that's what leads to mistrust, doesn't it? And I think there's all these tools that we can have, but you still need to have the communication.
Yeah, I'll give an example of that. I was working with another client who there was a mess up in payroll in another country with another provider, and we helped them draft a communication to employees, and they were like, this is really open and transparent. And you're going, yeah, you got to make sure you're setting expectations, because if employees go, why is this not correct, this pay cycle, how is it going to get corrected the next? And they don't, or if you don't tell them, they're going to see something as that, remember that one pay cycle being incorrect, you got one more chance after that. So making sure you're being as transparent as possible is key to success. It doesn't mean that you have to, you're not always going to deliver good news as an employer, right? And again, if you set up empathy for them, like, we understand this isn't correct, we're going to correct it, or hey, we're changing a provider because we're thinking about your experience, it really changes the dynamic with that employee overall experience. And I think it's going to be really important to set yourself up for success. And maybe you don't lose that one strike for that payroll being messed up, because you proactively gave them a heads up on it, and then they saw it, and then they said, oh, I already know they're going to correct it because they caught the problem in advance. I think that's really, really important in building trust and confidence, especially going into a particular country. I've also had situations where we have had to tell employees, we're new to this country. This is even when being an employer myself for many, many years, I didn't know how to do payroll a long time ago in Japan. I had to figure out how to do it. And so when we were hiring our Japanese employees, I had to figure out how I was going to do that and how I was going to support them in that. And that lesson I learned there was something I like to implement across my life now, was because they felt so much respect for the fact that we were being honest and transparent, that, hey, you're our first couple of employees in Japan. We've got to figure out how to do this, walk through this path with us. And actually, I think we were having that conversation with them in their interview process, so they knew what they were signing up from day one. I think that was really important, and it worked out really well. That particular organization ended up hiring almost 70 people in Japan, and because we just really were transparent, and then we got a hang of it, and then we actually implemented it correctly as well. And that organization is now coming over to Helios now to take over the Japanese payroll. But we're super excited about that, because it was a way that we were able to learn together with employees, and they felt very part of the process, which I thought was really good.
And actually, that's the feedback we get from the members, is sometimes a lack of communication from their providers, especially going into a new territory. It's new for them, and then don't necessarily understand the nuances. The communication isn't necessarily there from the provider. So I think having that transparency is really important. So Vanessa, for somebody who's on today's session, who's going into a new territory, what sort of thing do you think that they need to be aware of? Like, what complexities could they come across? Or is there anything that you'd say, this is my number one tip I would give you to go into a new territory?
And my number one tip is to get an international experienced partner on board, and to not be naive by thinking that you can just take what you know from home to the next territory, because that is not going to work. You need someone by your side who is realistic, who is honest, who is transparent, who can give you insight into what things really look like, and not what they look like just at first view. I gave the example of payroll data or salary data earlier. There are tons of others. We talked about terminations, benefits is a whole different field. All of those individually are a complete world on its own. So awareness is probably what I would mention as a first point. The fact that you need to be aware of the complexity and of the local challenges that it means to go international. Going international means that you go from one country to another country. It can be even in the EU. It can even be neighboring countries, because we have gone very far with data protection in the EU by unifying this with GDPR pretty much. Okay, so this is a different scenario. But if I am a German company and I only expand into France, a couple of kilometers away from where I am based, I am in a completely different world. It doesn't make any difference if I am the German company and go into France or go into Mexico. From a payroll perspective, it doesn't make any difference. It's complex, it's complicated, it's different. You need a global, international, experienced partner who can give you insights in what you are really looking at.
Yeah, I think, Melanie, as you think about that just a little bit, it's also making sure you understand your strategy. As I mentioned earlier, there's multiple ways that you can expand your business, and understanding what that looks like is going to be really important. There's a huge investment, and I say huge investment. There's investment when you go into a new country, and so what does that mean? Do you want to dip your toe into that? Do you want to go full throttle, or do you want to understand it a little bit more? There's different ways to do that, and making sure you have the right partner that can help you understand that and navigate that is going to be really important. I also think it's important that you also understand your own research, look at data insights, understand what's going on in those particular countries, ask all the questions. When you're vetting your providers, I always say, give them 3 scenarios and ask them how they would resolve that for you, and then help you make that decision in those particular countries. As Vanessa said, every country is a little bit different. And so making sure that you just understand the basics of what you're getting into. I always like to say, when someone is onboarding, everyone's happy. Everything's great. Everything's moving forward. It's the things that you have to think about is when things aren't going to go well. What happens if you don't pay that employee correctly? What if you have to terminate that employee? What is that going to look like? You need to understand kind of the full circle of that life cycle of that employee to make sure that you're making the right decision before you go into particular countries. And look, there's amazing talent out there. I always say hire the best talent, not just the person that's in your zip code or your postal code. Hire the best talent out there. The world is your oyster from that perspective. Take a look at that, work with them, hire them, but making sure that you also fortify your business and protect yourself from compliance regulations as well.
I had a scenario where a company wanted to employ, they were an engineering company. What they were looking to do was employ more females within the industry, within their organization. It was a really important initiative to them, but they struggled in the countries that they were in. So they did a review of the world and found where there were a lot of female engineers. And they're like, okay, we're going to go into a new territory. We're going to recruit more female engineers. And they were able to do that purely because of where we are in the world now. It's a different world to where we were 15 years ago. So there are so many positives.
I agree. I think the thing is about the global workforce is that it's your ability to hire anyone anytime, anywhere. And if you have the right platforms, the right technology, the right partners, you really can leverage that for your own success. And I think that's really important. But as we've talked about a lot here is the complexity of that is how do you simplify that as much as possible? How do you make sure you can meet your customers where you're at, and making sure that if you are a CEO with 15 employees, or you're a payroll professional with 25 years and can operate in 100 countries, you need a platform that can scale with you and understand that and make sure that you're setting yourselves up for success. Compliance is really important. Making sure that you have a partner that understands that and has got skin in the game with you, I think it's really important.
And we're coming to sort of like our natural end, and we always do around this time. But one of the things that we haven't really touched upon, obviously with sort of technology and the way things are changing to the positive, is how employers can help with employee with well-being, and also with things being introduced like earned wage access. So earned wage access is in some countries you have to offer this service. It's something new that's hit in other countries, and people are learning about it. Do you think there are other things that are coming into the industry over the next 5 years to earned wage access, or do you think earned wage access is going to keep developing into maybe daily pay?
Yeah, I think that's the direction you're going, as daily pay. You're starting to see. You see that already now with some of these industries, like Uber drivers, Lyft drivers. You're seeing a lot of that already. People like the gig economy. They like to make sure they see that. There are other solutions that have now come out that you can get advanced pay, like get paid when you want to get paid. I've seen a lot of those commercials before. Employees people don't want to wait 1 month to get compensation. People don't want to wait bi-weekly or monthly to get weekly to get their pay. So yeah, I think that's the direction we're going to end up going. That's more complex. We're also finding that a lot of companies are asking now about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency as well, and what that means. And we've talked about this one before, Melanie. Countries are not going to devalue their currencies behind that, but what employees want to understand. We just saw a surge in Bitcoin over the last 2 weeks. So they feel like they can actually increase their pay if they're being paid in Bitcoin that way as well. And so there's going to be a lot of things that come on the docket over the next couple of years. If it's daily pay, wage access, bit or cryptocurrency, those are things that are going to come up more and more as we're diversifying how we're actually looking at compensation. I think, if you ask yourself 10 years ago, what we were doing for payroll today, I remember we were just talking about this, Vanessa, the other day. I remember when, a benefit was working from home 1 day a week. We're like, yay, one day a week, I get to do that. It's a great benefit. And now you're like, you have to come to the office 2 days a week. You're like, what? So we evolve and I think we're going to see a lot of that in payroll, because employees want more flexibility in their pay, especially with inflation and everything coming up as well. Employees want more access to their pay sooner than later, and they want flexibility in how they get paid. And that, again, using like cryptocurrency or flex pay, those are things that you're going to start seeing more and more come up. And then once it gets more popularity, you're going to see even more of that come to the docket with regulators as well.
Yeah. So Vanessa, before we leave, is there anything that you wanted to add at all?
Flexibility is key. Was what came to my mind when I heard Rick explaining how we are going to adapt to the future of work, which is already here, by the way. The future of work is already here. Flexibility is key. We need to be more flexible than ever. The world is changing all the time, and it's not only changing as it changed before. The world has always been changing. It's changing faster than ever before. Technology used in the right way can help us to adapt to those changes. Legislators are always going to be a bit slow on that, a bit slower than society. We talked about this. I thought about my own example earlier. What has always been quite standard in Europe is that people work in one country and live in another one where they live close to the border. But today you are not a French person living close to the border with Spain and probably considering taking a job in Spain, or the other way around. Today you are in Europe and you consider taking a job in Mexico without moving, by the way, or in the US, okay? So flexibility is key. Technology can help us to adapt to the flexibility, definitely, if we use it in the right way.
So what we'll have to do is have another one of these in 5 years' time, review what we said, and then see how much the world has changed. So thank you so much, Lindsay and Stuart, for your nice comments. It's always great to see. So thank you all for joining us. I think we're meeting up again next in December before the holidays start. So thank you, Vanessa, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed your first session with us.
Very much. Thank you so much.
And Rick, obviously we'll see you again in a few weeks. I hope all is going well with Helios. And as always, if anybody wants to get in contact with you, feel free to contact Rick directly, and I know Rick will answer.
Perfect. Yeah. And like I said, we're here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.